Imagine waking up from a medical emergency to discover that not only has your family's financial security been shattered, but your own identity seems to have been stolen in the process. That's exactly what happened to me just 3 months ago. While I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed, my own sister, someone I trusted without question, was systematically draining our elderly parents' accounts. But the real shock came when I tried to fix it all, and the bank manager looked me right in the eyes and called me, "Ma'am." This is my story. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jessica Reynolds, and until recently, I thought I knew what family loyalty meant. My parents, Robert and Martha Reynolds, worked hard their entire lives to build a modest but secure retirement fund. Dad spent 30 years as a high school chemistry teacher, and Mom was a nurse at the local clinic in our small town of Pinewood, just outside of Milwaukee. They were never wealthy, but they were cautious with money and always made sure they had something set aside for emergencies. I'm their eldest daughter at 32, and I work as a software developer at a tech startup in Chicago. My sister Amber is 3 years younger and still lives in Pinewood, supposedly helping care for our parents who are now in their 70s. Dad has early-stage Parkinson's, and Mom's arthritis has gotten worse over the last few years, making it difficult for her to manage everyday tasks. 3 months ago, I was in Chicago finalizing a major project for our company's biggest client. The deadline was brutal, and I'd been pulling 16-hour days for weeks. I hadn't been taking care of myself, barely sleeping, living on coffee and takeout, and ignoring the persistent headache that had been my constant companion for days. Then came that Tuesday morning. I was in a video conference with the client when the room started to spin. My colleague, Marcus, said I suddenly stopped mid-sentence, and my face went blank. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in Northwestern Memorial Hospital with tubes and monitors attached to me and a concerned doctor standing over my bed. "You had a brain aneurysm, Ms. Reynolds," the doctor explained, her voice calm but serious. "It was a small one, fortunately, and we were able to repair it without major surgery. But you're going to need to stay here for observation and then take significant time off to recover." I was stunned. I'd always been healthy, always been the dependable one. The doctor continued explaining that the combination of stress, sleep deprivation, and possibly some genetic factors had created the perfect storm. My blood pressure had been dangerously high when I was admitted. My first thought was about the project, but my second was about my parents. I asked a nurse to bring me my phone so I could call them, but she explained that Marcus had already contacted my emergency contacts, which included both my parents and Amber. "Your sister has been here," the nurse said. "She said she needed to get back to your parents but would return tomorrow." That seemed reasonable. Amber had her flaws. She'd never really settled into a stable career and had a habit of borrowing. Money she rarely repaid, but she was good with our parents, patient in a way I sometimes struggled to be. I spent 10 days in the hospital. The doctors were cautious about my recovery, monitoring me closely for any complications. Amber visited occasionally, always seeming rushed and distracted. She told me not to worry about Mom and Dad, saying she had everything under control. "Just focus on getting better, Jess," she said, patting my hand. "I've taken over all the bills and stuff for Mom and Dad. You don't need to stress about anything." I was grateful, honestly. Managing my parents' finances had largely fallen to me over the past few years, as Dad's tremors made it difficult for him to write checks, and Mom's memory wasn't what it used to be. I had power of attorney for both of them and managed their accounts online, paying their bills and making sure their retirement funds and Social Security payments were properly handled. When I was finally discharged, my doctor was adamant that I couldn't return to work for at least 6 weeks and strongly advised against the 3-hour drive back to Pinewood to see my parents right away. My boss, thankfully understanding, arranged for me to take medical leave, and my friend Ellie offered to let me stay with her during my recovery. 2 weeks into my recovery at Ellie's apartment, I was feeling stronger and decided to check my parents' accounts to make sure everything was in order. I opened my laptop, went to their bank's website, and entered the login information. Access denied. I tried again, thinking I might have mistyped the password. Same result. That was strange. I called the bank's customer service number, and after verifying my identity, the representative informed me that the account password had been changed 3 weeks ago. Can you tell me who changed it? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. It appears the password was reset during an in-person visit by Martha Reynolds, the representative said after a pause. That was impossible. My mother barely understood how online banking worked, and her arthritis would have made it extremely difficult for her to type a new password. There must be some mistake, I said. My mother wouldn't have been able to do that. I have power of attorney for my parents. I see that in our records, Ms. Reynolds. But it appears there was a new power of attorney document filed 3 weeks ago, giving authority to Amber Reynolds instead. The room seemed to tilt slightly, reminiscent of that moment before my collapse. That can't be right. Can you please check again? The representative confirmed the information and suggested I visit my local branch in person to sort things out. I thanked her, hung up, and immediately called my parents' house. No answer. I tried Amber's cell phone. Straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. Ellie, seeing my growing panic, offered to drive me to Pinewood that weekend if I felt up to it. My doctor had advised against travel, but I needed to see my parents and figure out what was happening. That Friday, we made the drive to Pinewood. As Ellie's car pulled into my parents' driveway, I was struck by how unkempt the yard looked. So unlike my fastidious father, who had always kept the lawn immaculate despite his condition. My mother answered the door, her face lighting up with surprise and then concern. Jessica, what are you doing here? You should be resting. She hugged me gently, careful of my still healing condition. I'm okay, Mom. I just needed to see you and Dad. Where's Amber? Mom's expression changed subtly. She's been so helpful, Jess. She moved in temporarily to help us after your episode. She's out running errands now. I entered the familiar living room to find my father in his recliner, looking thinner than I remembered. He smiled when he saw me, but there was confusion in his eyes. Jessie, girl, when did you get back from your trip? My heart sank. Dad's cognitive function had clearly declined in my absence. I've been in Chicago, Dad, remember? I had to go to the hospital for a bit. He nodded vaguely. Right. Amber's been taking care of everything. Has she? Can we talk about that? I sat down carefully on the couch. Mom, has Amber been managing your bank accounts? Mom glanced toward the door nervously. She said it would be easier while you were sick. She had us sign some papers at the bank. Did you know those papers gave her power of attorney? That means she can legally control all your finances. Mom looked genuinely confused. That can't be right. We just signed to let her help with the bills until you are better. I took a deep breath, fighting the headache that threatened to return. Can I see your latest bank statements? Amber keeps all that now, Dad said. She's got a system. I excused myself and went to my parents' home office, where they had always kept their financial documents. The filing cabinet was nearly empty. The drawer labeled Bank contained only outdated statements from 6 months ago. As I was searching, I heard the front door open and Amber's voice filled the hallway. Mom, I got your prescription refilled and... She stopped short in the doorway of the office, her eyes widening at the sight of me. Jessica, what are you doing here? Jessica. Amber's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. She was dressed in an expensive-looking blazer that I didn't recognize, and her nails were freshly manicured. Unusual luxuries for someone who had always complained about being broke. The doctor said you shouldn't travel. I'm fine, I said, closing the filing cabinet drawer. Just checking on Mom and Dad, and trying to figure out why I've been locked out of their bank accounts. Amber's face hardened momentarily before softening into a concerned smile. Oh, that. I was going to call you about it. We just streamlined things while you were recovering. No need for both of us to manage their finances, right? You've got enough on your plate with your health. Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. I'd known Amber my entire life, had shared a bedroom with her for 18 years, but in that moment, she felt like a stranger. Let's talk outside, I suggested, not wanting to worry our parents. Ellie, sensing the tension, offered to help Mom prepare some tea. I led Amber to the backyard patio, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dad's neglected garden. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. What's really going on? I asked once we were alone. The bank tells you've taken over power of attorney. Amber sat in one of the wrought iron chairs, crossing her legs casually. Look, Jess, let's be real. You had a brain aneurysm. You could have died. Someone needed to step in and take charge of Mom and Dad's affairs, and I was here. But why change the power of attorney without telling me? And why can't I access their accounts anymore? She shrugged. Legal formality. The bank suggested it would be cleaner this way. As for the accounts, I figured you needed to focus on healing, not worrying about bill payments. Show me the statements then, I challenged. Let me see what's been happening with their money. A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed her face before she replied. I don't have them here. Everything's digital now. Very eco-friendly. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. Seriously, Jess, you're being paranoid. Maybe it's a side effect of your medication? I felt my temper rising. Don't gaslight me, Amber. I want to see their financial records, and I want to see them. Now. Fine, she sighed dramatically, pulling out her phone. I'll log in and show you. Happy? She turned her screen toward me, but angled it in a way that made it difficult to see clearly. I caught glimpses of the balance in my parents' checking account, considerably lower than it should have been, before she quickly scrolled to the bill payment section. See? Mortgage paid, utilities paid, medicine paid. Everything's under control. She clicked her phone off before I could look closer. What about their savings? Retirement accounts? Those are fine too, she said dismissively. Look, I know you're used to being in charge, but you need to trust me. This helicopter sister routine isn't good for your recovery. I felt a headache, building behind my eyes, but pushed through it. I just want to make sure everything's okay. And I'm telling you it is. Amber stood up. Now, are you staying for dinner? I need to know how much to make. The casual shift in conversation threw me off balance. Yes, I guess so. Ellie and I can stay. Great, Amber said with false brightness. I'll go help Mom. You should rest. You look pale. As she walked back toward the house, I pulled out my phone and quickly texted my friend Devin, who worked as a financial advisor. Need urgent help with possible financial elder abuse situation. Can you talk tomorrow? His response came. Quickly, of course. Call me anytime after 9 a.m. Dinner was tense despite Amber's attempts at normalcy. She dominated the conversation, barely letting me get a word in, and deflected any time I tried to ask about finances. Mom seemed nervous, her eyes darting between Amber and me, while Dad was mostly quiet, occasionally getting confused about who was talking. What disturbed me most was how Amber had positioned herself as the authority in the house. She answered questions directed at our parents, made decisions without consulting them, and they seemed to defer to her automatically. In just a few weeks, the family dynamic had shifted dramatically. After dinner, I helped Mom with the dishes, while Amber took Dad to the living room to watch his favorite game show. Mom, I said quietly, how are you really doing? Is everything okay with you and Dad? Mom glanced toward the doorway before answering. We're managing, dear. Amber's been very involved. Has she been spending money? I noticed her new clothes, The manicure. Mom frowned slightly. She said she got a bonus at work, and she deserves to treat herself. She's been doing so much for us. What work, Mom? Last I knew, Amber was between jobs again. Oh, she's doing some consulting now. Very impressive sounding. Something with marketing. Mom's vague answer didn't inspire confidence. And the bank accounts? Did you understand what you were signing when you went to the bank? Mom's hands stilled in the soapy water. Not entirely, she admitted. There were so many papers and my eyes were tired. Amber said it was just temporary until you were better. My stomach nodded. And have you noticed any large withdrawals? Any unusual expenses? I don't really see the statements anymore. Amber handles all that now. She paused, lowering her voice further. But I overheard her on the phone the other day, talking about a down payment for something. I assumed it was for her apartment. Amber didn't own an apartment. She rented a small place above the local bookstore. A down payment could only mean one thing. She was planning to buy property. Mom, I'm worried that Amber might be... What are you two whispering about? Amber appeared in the doorway, her smile tight. Dad's asking for his evening pills, Mom. As Mom dried her hands and hurried to get Dad's medication, Amber fixed me with a cold stare. You should really get some rest, Jess. You look exhausted. Was tired, but I wasn't about to back down. Actually, I was thinking of staying the night. My old room is still available, right? Amber's smile froze. I'm using it right now, actually. I've been staying over to help with Dad's night episodes. The guest room is full of storage. I can sleep on the couch, I insisted. That's not good for your recovery? Amber countered, quickly. Besides, Ellie's waiting to drive you back. As if on cue, Ellie appeared, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but it's getting late, and we should probably head back if we want to avoid night driving. I suspected Amber had orchestrated this while I was in the kitchen with Mom, but I couldn't prove it. And truthfully, I was feeling the strain of the day. The doctor had warned me about overexertion. Fine, I conceded. But I'm coming back tomorrow. And I want to go to the bank with you and Mom. Of course, Amber agreed too readily. Whatever makes you feel better. I hugged my parents goodbye, whispering to my mother, Don't sign anything else. I'll be back tomorrow. As Ellie drove us to her cousin's place where we'd arranged to stay the night, I filled her in on my suspicions. You think she's stealing? From your parents? Ellie asked, her eyes wide. I don't know for sure, I admitted. But something's definitely off. The account balances are lower than they should be, she's suddenly spending money she shouldn't have, and she's being incredibly evasive. Maybe there's an innocent explanation? I wanted to believe that, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. Maybe. But I'm going to find out the truth tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I decided to try another angle. I logged into my parents' credit card accounts, separate from their bank accounts, hoping Amber hadn't thought to change those passwords too. To my relief, I was able to access the statements. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the 3 weeks since my hospitalization, there had been charges I couldn't explain. A $3,000 payment to a real estate agency, $5,000 to a furniture store, $2,500 at a high-end electronics retailer, and numerous smaller charges at restaurants and boutiques that my parents would never frequent. I took screenshots of everything, then checked their other credit card. Same. Story. Unusual, large purchases that couldn't possibly be for my parents' benefit. In total, Amber had racked up over $15,000 in credit card debt in their names in less than a month. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I called Devin as soon as the clock hit 9 a.m. This is definitely concerning, he said after I explained the situation. It has all the hallmarks of financial exploitation. If your sister obtained power of attorney through deception and is using their funds for personal benefit, that's elder abuse, which is both a civil and criminal matter. What should I do? Document everything, Devin advised. Then go to the bank in person with your parents and explain the situation. Bring a copy of your original power of attorney document. If the bank sees evidence of exploitation, they can freeze the accounts. You should also report this to Adult Protective Services and possibly the police. I thanked him and ended the call, then asked Ellie to drive me back to my parents' house. When we arrived around 10 a.m., I was surprised to find the driveway empty. Mom answered the door in her robe, looking confused. Jessica, I didn't expect you so early. Where's Amber? I asked, stepping inside. And where's Dad? Amber took him to his doctor's appointment, Mom explained. They left about an hour ago. That was strange. Dad's neurologist was meticulous about scheduling, and appointments were typically booked months in advance. The earliest appointment of the day would be at 9 a.m., and they'd be back by now. Which doctor, Mom? Dr. Harrington? Mom hesitated. I think so. Amber handled it. She said it was important. I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Harrington's office. As I suspected, they had no record of an appointment for my father today. Mom, get dressed, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to go to the bank right now. But Amber said to wait. Mom, please, it's important. 20 minutes later, Ellie drove us to First National Bank of Pinewood, where my parents had been customers for decades. I helped Mom inside and asked to speak with a manager. I'm concerned about possible financial exploitation of my parents' accounts, I explained to the receptionist. My sister may have fraudulently obtained power of attorney. We were ushered into a private office where we met Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager, a balding man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on his nose. He greeted my mother warmly. Mrs. Reynolds, good to see you again. And you must be... He looked at me. The other daughter, Amber? No, I'm Jessica, I corrected. The elder daughter. Mr. Jenkins frowned, checking his computer. That's odd. According to our records, Jessica Reynolds is currently hospitalized with a serious medical condition. Mrs. Reynolds and her daughter Amber were in just last week to update us on the situation. A cold realization washed over me. Mr. Jenkins, I am Jessica Reynolds. I was hospitalized with a brain aneurysm, but I've been discharged. My sister Amber has been misrepresenting herself as me. He looked skeptical. Do you have identification, ma'am? I pulled out my driver's license and handed it to him. I also have the original power of attorney document that my parents signed 3 years ago, giving me authority to manage their finances. Mr. Jenkins examined both documents carefully, then looked back at his computer screen with growing concern. This is highly irregular. It appears someone claiming to be Jessica Reynolds came in with Mrs. Reynolds to execute the new power of attorney. The signature on file, he turned his monitor to show me, doesn't match the one on your license. I felt sick. That's because my sister forged it. She's been impersonating me. Is this true, Mrs. Reynolds? Mr. Jenkins asked my mother directly. Mom looked distressed. I thought... Amber said Jessica was too sick to handle things and that she would sign temporarily as Jessica to avoid confusion. I didn't realize... Mr. Jenkins's expression hardened. That constitutes fraud, Mrs. Reynolds, and potentially identity theft. He turned back to me. Have you noticed any unusual transactions? I showed him the screenshots I'd taken of the credit card statements. These don't align with my parents' spending habits at all. And based on the account balance I glimpsed yesterday, I suspect there have been significant withdrawals from their savings as well. Mr. Jenkins typed rapidly on his keyboard, his frown deepening with each click. I'm seeing multiple large withdrawals. In the past 3 weeks, a $50,000 transfer to an external account just yesterday, another $30,000 the week before. Mom gasped. That's impossible. We would never. It appears these were done online, using the credentials associated with the new power of attorney, Mr. Jenkins explained grimly. There's also a loan application submitted in your names, Mrs. Reynolds, for a home equity line of credit against your property. I felt the room spin slightly and gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. My parents had paid off their mortgage 5 years ago. Their home was their greatest asset, worth at least $400,000 in the current market. Has the loan been approved? I asked, dreading the answer. It's pending final signatures. The appointment is scheduled for... He checked the calendar. Today at 11:30 a.m. I checked my watch. 11:15. Where? At Capital Loans across town, Mr. Jenkins said. But given these circumstances, I'll need to report this suspected fraud immediately and freeze these accounts. Yes, please do that, I agreed. And can you provide documentation of everything you found? I need to go to the police. Mr. Jenkins nodded, then looked up suddenly as the office door opened. The receptionist appeared, looking flustered. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's Amber Reynolds insisting on seeing you immediately, Mr. Jenkins. She's quite adamant. My sister stood behind the receptionist, her face contorted with anger when she saw me sitting there. Beside her was my father, looking confused and distressed. What's going on here? Amber demanded, stepping into the office uninvited. Mom, I told you to wait at home. Ms. Reynolds? Mr. Jenkins said coolly. I was just discussing some concerning activity on your parents' accounts with your sister, the real Jessica Reynolds. Amber's face paled, but she recovered quickly. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. My sister is not well. She's having cognitive issues after her aneurysm. Her doctors warned us about potential delusions. That's not true, I said, standing up. Dad, where were you this morning? Was it a doctor's appointment? Dad looked between Amber and me, clearly confused. We went to sign some papers for the house. He's confused, Amber cut in. We were at Dr. Harrington's. I just spoke with Dr. Harrington's office, I said. You didn't have an appointment. Mr. Jenkins picked up his phone. I think it's best if I contact the police to sort this out. Wait, Amber said, suddenly panicking. Let's not be hasty. This is a family matter. We can resolve this privately. Like, you resolved it by draining our parents' accounts? I asked. By forging my signature and impersonating me? By trying to take out a loan against their house? Mom started to cry softly. Dad moved to her side, his hand trembling more than usual as he patted her shoulder. You've always been the favorite, Amber snarled, her facade cracking. Perfect Jessica with her big city job and her perfect life, while I'm stuck in this dead end, town taking care of them. She gestured dismissively at our parents. Do you have any idea what that's been like? What have I sacrificed? So that justifies stealing from them? I asked incredulously. They worked their entire lives for that. Money. And what good is it doing them sitting in the bank? Amber shot back. Dad can barely remember what day it is half the time. They don't need a nest egg. They need someone to make their final years comfortable, which is what I've been doing. By buying yourself furniture and electronics? By putting a down payment on property? Amber's eyes narrowed. You don't understand. You've never understood. Mr. Jenkins, who had been quietly speaking into his phone, set it down. The police are on their way, and I've flagged the loan application as fraudulent. Amber's face contorted, with rage. She grabbed her purse and made a dash for the door, but Ellie, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stuck out her foot. Amber went sprawling, her purse contents scattering across the floor, including several credit cards with our parents' names on them. As Amber tried to gather her things, Mr. Jenkins moved around the desk and stood by the door. I think it's best if you wait here for the police, Ms. Reynolds. Amber looked up at me, hatred burning in her eyes. You'll regret this, Jessica. I was the only one who really cared about them. No, I said quietly. You only cared about yourself. And now you're going to face the consequences. The police arrived minutes later, and as they led Amber away in handcuffs, Mr. Jenkins turned to me with a sympathetic expression. We'll do everything. We can to recover the funds, Ms. Reynolds, he said. And I sincerely apologize for the confusion. We should have verified your sister's identity more thoroughly. Thank you, I said. Then, remembering what had tipped me off to the whole situation, I asked, By the way, Mr. Jenkins, when my sister was pretending to be me, did you call her ma'am? He looked embarrassed. I did, actually. Bank policy. We address all adult women as ma'am out of respect. I nodded, a grim smile playing at my lips. And that's exactly what gave her away. Because the real me would have known that I've been dealing with this bank for years, and not once have you ever called me ma'am. The aftermath of Amber's arrest unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. As we left the bank that day, reporters from the local newspaper were already gathering. Financial fraud involving the elderly rarely happened in a town as small as Pinewood, and word traveled fast. I shielded my parents from the cameras as best I could, but the damage to their reputation and dignity had already begun. Dad kept asking where Amber was, unable to fully comprehend what had happened. Mom alternated between silent shock and quiet sobbing. The betrayal cut deeper for her. She had trusted Amber implicitly and had defended her against my occasional criticisms over the years. I should have seen it, Mom whispered as Ellie drove us home. There were signs. What kind of signs? I asked gently. Mom stared out the window, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. She started buying things for the house, a new television, fancy kitchen appliances we didn't need. Said they were gifts from her new job. Then last week, she took all of my jewelry to be cleaned. My engagement ring, the pearls your father gave me for our 25th anniversary. Her voice broke. I'll never see them again, will I? I reached over to squeeze her hand, anger burning in my chest. The financial theft was bad enough, but the sentimental items were irreplaceable. Back at the house, I helped Mom settle Dad in his recliner while Ellie made tea. Once Dad had dozed off, I began searching the house. In Amber's temporary bedroom, my old room, I found shopping bags stuffed in the closet with receipts for items I'd never seen in the house. Designer clothes with tags still attached. A receipt for a storage unit rental. On the desk was a notebook filled with practice signatures, Dad's, Mom's, and mine, getting progressively more identical to our actual handwriting with each attempt. A chill ran through me as I flipped through page after page of methodical forgery practice. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Mendoza, who had taken our statement at the bank. They'd executed a search warrant on Amber's apartment and found my parents' jewelry in a safe, along with documents for a pending purchase of a condo in Tampa, Florida, $80,000 down payment, closing in 2 days. We've frozen the transaction, Officer Mendoza wrote, but she's already wired the down payment. We're working to recover it. I showed the message to Mom, whose relief at the recovery of her jewelry was palpable. But the financial situation remained dire. Between the credit card charges and the bank withdrawals, Amber had stolen nearly $100,000 in just 3 weeks, more than half of my parents' liquid assets. That evening, Devin came over with pizza and his laptop. As a financial advisor, he volunteered to help us assess the damage and create a recovery plan. The good news, he said as we spread bank statements across the dining room table, is that she didn't touch your parents' retirement accounts or their investments. Those require more than a power of attorney to liquidate. And the bad news? I asked. Devin grimaced. The cash she wired for the condo down payment might be difficult to recover quickly. Wire transfers, once completed, are challenging to reverse. The bank has filed the fraud claim, but it could take weeks or even months. What about their credit? She opened new cards in their names, I said, pointing to applications I'd found in Amber's desk drawer. That's actually easier to address, Devin explained. We'll file identity theft reports and get those removed from their credit reports. But you'll need to be vigilant about monitoring their credit for the next few years. As Devin outlined the steps we needed to take, the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just a one-time crisis to resolve. It was the beginning of a long, painful process that would require ongoing attention. My parents weren't equipped to handle it themselves, and I lived 3 hours away with a demanding job and my own health issues to manage. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, the weight of the situation pressing on my still fragile health. My head throbbed, a reminder from my doctors about avoiding stress during recovery. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," Devin said kindly. "Let's take it one step at a time." The following week was a blur of appointments with the police, lawyers, bank officials, and adult protective services. Statements had to be given, affidavits signed, fraud alerts placed. I extended my medical leave from work, unable to imagine returning to Chicago while everything remained unsettled. Meanwhile, Amber sat in the county jail, unable to make bail. The district attorney had charged her with multiple felonies: financial elder abuse, identity theft, forgery, and grand theft. The gravity of the charges reflected the premeditated nature of her crimes. I hired Sandra Tompkins, an elder law attorney recommended by Devin, to help navigate the legal complexities. She was a formidable woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense attitude that I found reassuring. "Unfortunately, your case isn't unique," Sandra told me during our first meeting. "Financial elder abuse is increasingly common, and family members are often the perpetrators." "I never thought my own sister would do something like this," I said. Sandra's expression softened slightly. People rationalize their actions in surprising ways. In her mind, she may have felt entitled to the money, especially if she perceived herself as the primary caregiver. "But she wasn't," I protested. "I managed everything remotely. She just lived closer." "Which may have fed her resentment," Sandra pointed out. "These situations rarely develop overnight. There's usually a history of perceived inequity or injustice, whether real or imagined." Her words made me reflect on our childhood and the subtle dynamics that had always existed between Amber and me. As the older sibling, I had excelled academically and professionally, while Amber struggled to find her path. Our parents had never overtly favored either of us, but success created its own kind of favoritism. Had I missed the signs of her growing resentment over the years? These thoughts troubled me as I sat in the visitors' area of the county jail, waiting to see Amber for the first time since her arrest. I wasn't sure why I had come. Closure, understanding, or perhaps some lingering hope that my sister wasn't completely lost to me. When Amber was let in, I barely recognized her. Gone were the designer clothes and manicured nails, replaced by an orange jumpsuit and a hollow expression. Her eyes, however, still blazed with the same defiance I had seen at the bank. "Come to gloat?" she asked as she sat across from me, separated by a thick pane of glass. "No," I replied evenly. "I came to understand why." Amber laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Why? Because I was tired of being the family failure. Because I watched you build your perfect life in Chicago while I was stuck cleaning up after Dad when he couldn't make it to the bathroom on time. Because I listened to Mom talk endlessly about how proud she was of you, her successful daughter, while barely acknowledging my existence." "That's not true," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if there was some truth to her perception. Isn't it? When was the last time anyone in this family celebrated anything I did? When was the last time Mom showed someone my picture instead of yours? Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you know what it's like to be invisible? In your own family." I wanted to argue, to defend our parents and myself, but I forced myself to listen instead. "They have more money than they'll ever spend," Amber continued. "Dad can't even remember what year it is half the time, and Mom's arthritis is getting worse every day. Meanwhile, I've been living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in student debt from a degree I never finished." "So you decided to steal from them?" I asked, trying to keep the judgment from my voice. "I decided to take what I deserved," she corrected. What I earned by being the one who was actually there. Not managing things remotely from your high-rise apartment, but physically present for every doctor's appointment, every midnight panic attack, every moment of their decline. I took a deep breath. Amber, if you needed money, you could have asked. We could have figured something out, she scoffed. And be your charity case? No thanks. Besides, this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about recognition. For once in my life, I wanted to be in control, to make the decisions. By pretending to be me, a small, cruel smile played on her lips. That was the sweetest part, actually. Being you. Having people look at me the way they look at you, with respect, with deference. Even that pompous bank manager calling me ma'am, like I was someone important. The conversation continued in this vein, revealing a depth of resentment and entitlement that shocked me. By the time I left, I felt drained, unsure if I had gained the understanding I sought or simply opened a wound that would never fully heal. Outside the jail, I sat in my rental car for a long time, trying to process everything. My phone buzzed, with a text from my boss in Chicago, asking about my return date. Another decision loomed. How could I go back to my life knowing my parents needed me here? That evening, I sat down with Mom and Dad to have a difficult conversation about the future. Dad was having one of his clearer days, which was both a blessing and a curse. He understood enough to be devastated by what had happened. I don't understand how she could do this to us, he said, his hands trembling more than usual. We gave her everything. I know, Dad, I said softly. But right now, we need to focus on moving forward. I laid out the options Sandra had helped me identify. Given their deteriorating health and the financial impact of Amber's theft, continuing to live independently in their large family home might no longer be feasible. We could sell the house and find you a smaller place, maybe a senior living community with support services, I suggested gently. Or you could come live with me in Chicago. Mom looked up sharply. Leave Pinewood? All our friends are here, our doctors, our church. I know it's not ideal, I acknowledged. But the financial reality is that you've lost a significant portion of your savings. The house is expensive to maintain, and you both need increasing levels of care. We're not invalids, Dad protested, a flash of his old spirit showing through. No, you're not, I agreed. But Mom's arthritis makes cooking and cleaning difficult, and your Parkinson's is progressing. Would you rather have strangers helping? You or family? The conversation was painful but necessary. By the end of the evening, no decisions had been made, but the possibilities had been voiced. I promised to research senior communities in both Pinewood and Chicago to give them options. Over the next few days, a surprising source of support emerged: the Pinewood community itself. Word of what had happened spread, and neighbors began showing up with home-cooked meals, offers of help with yard work, and simple companionship. Mom's church group organized a rotation of visitors to ensure she wasn't alone during the day, and Dad's former students, now adults with families of their own, came by to play chess with him or simply sit and reminisce. One evening, Ellie and I were sorting through bills in the kitchen when there was a knock at the door. It was Timothy Clark, the owner of Clark's Hardware, where my father had been a regular customer for decades. Heard about what happened, he said gruffly, handing me an envelope. The business owners downtown took up a collection. It's not much, but we wanted to help. Inside was over $5,000 in cash and checks, along with a card signed by dozens of local merchants and friends. I was speechless, tears welling in my eyes. Your parents are good people, Timothy continued. They've supported this community for years, teaching our kids, volunteering at the hospital. Now it's our turn to support them. As word of the community's response spread, more help arrived. A local law firm offered pro bono services to assist with the fraud claims. A financial, Planner volunteered to help restructure my parents' remaining assets for maximum security and income. Even the principal at Dad's former school organized a benefit dinner that raised another $7,000. The generosity was overwhelming, but it also presented a new dilemma. If my parents stayed in Pinewood, they would have this incredible support network. If they moved to Chicago with me, they would have family but would lose these deep community connections. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Amber continued. She had been appointed a public defender, but the evidence against her was substantial. The prosecutor offered a plea deal, 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3, in exchange for a guilty plea to all charges. Sandra advised us to accept the deal. A trial would be traumatic for your parents, she explained. They would have to testify, have their financial details made public, and relive the betrayal. And given the evidence, the outcome would likely be the same or worse for Amber. After careful consideration, we agreed. Amber, perhaps realizing the futility of fighting the charges, accepted the plea. The sentencing was scheduled for the following month. As these legal matters progressed, I was forced to make decisions about my own life. My medical leave was nearing its end, and my doctors had cleared me to return to work with certain accommodations. My boss had been understanding, but made it clear that my position couldn't remain vacant indefinitely. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing with Mom, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, she took my hand in her arthritic. "You need to go back to your life, Jessica," she said gently. "I can't leave you and Dad right now," I protested. "Yes, you can," Mom insisted. "We raised you to build your own life, not to put it on hold for us. Besides," she smiled, gesturing toward the neighbor mowing our lawn without being asked, "we're not alone here. But the financial situation will be managed," she finished. "Thanks to Sandra and Devin, we have a plan. The house is being put on the market next week. The senior community on Maple Street has an opening for a 2-bedroom apartment. It's smaller, but it will be easier for us to manage, and they have support services for when we need them." I was surprised by her decisiveness. "When did you decide all this?" Mom squeezed my hand. "Your father and I have been discussing it. This house is too big for us now, full of too many memories, both good and painful. It's time for a new chapter." "But what if you need me?" "We will always need you," Mom said. "Just not in the way you think. We need you to be happy, to be successful, to live the life you've worked so hard to build. That gives us more joy than having you here as our caretaker." I leaned my head on her shoulder, feeling both relieved and guilty. "I'll come back regularly, every other weekend, and we'll set up video calls for the days in between." "That sounds perfect," Mom said. "And, who knows, maybe in a few years, when your father and I are truly unable to manage on our own, we'll reconsider that Chicago option. I've always wanted to see the Art Institute." We sat in comfortable silence as the last rays of sun disappeared behind the horizon. For the first time since my collapse in that Chicago conference room, I felt a sense of possibility rather than crisis. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult moments: Amber's sentencing, selling the family home, helping my parents adjust to their new living situation, balancing my career with my family responsibilities. The financial wounds would take years to heal, and the emotional ones even longer. But as fireflies began to appear in the gathering dusk, I realized that while my sister's betrayal had shattered our family in profound ways, it had also revealed strengths we didn't know we possessed, and support we had never fully appreciated. "We're going to be okay," I said, as much to myself as to my mother. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the first evening stars. "Yes, we are. Different, but okay." 6 weeks after Amber's arrest, I stood in the county courthouse, watching my sister being sentenced for her crimes. She sat stiffly at the defendant's table, her public defender beside her, as the judge reviewed the plea agreement and the impact statements. My parents had chosen not to attend. The emotional toll would have been too great, particularly for Dad, whose cognitive fluctuations had worsened since the ordeal began. Instead, I represented the family, carrying the weight of their heartbreak and betrayal on my shoulders. Judge Eleanor Marquez, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and penetrating eyes, addressed the court. Financial elder abuse is not merely a property crime. It is a profound violation of trust that often leaves victims not only financially devastated, but emotionally shattered. When the perpetrator is a family member, that violation cuts even deeper. She fixed Amber with a steady gaze. Ms. Reynolds, you systematically exploited your parents' vulnerability and your sister's medical crisis to enrich yourself. You did not act on impulse or out of desperation, but with calculated premeditation, going so far as to impersonate your sister and forge multiple documents. Amber stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The court accepts the plea agreement of 5 years incarceration with possibility of parole after 3 years, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, Judge Marquez continued. Additionally, you are ordered to make full restitution in the amount of $103,457.82, which represents the total funds and property value you misappropriated. The judge paused, her expression softening slightly as she looked at me. However, I recognize that restitution may take many years, and your parents need financial stability now. Therefore, I am also ordering the immediate liquidation of all assets purchased with the stolen funds, with proceeds to be returned directly to the victims. This was an unexpected victory. Sandra had warned me that asset recovery could be a lengthy process, potentially dragging on long after Amber's release. Ms. Reynolds, Judge Marquez addressed Amber again. Do you understand these terms? Amber nodded numbly. Yes, Your Honor. And do you have anything to say before sentencing is finalized? For the first time, Amber looked up, her eyes scanning the courtroom until they found mine. For a brief moment, I thought I glimpsed remorse in her expression, but it quickly hardened into the same defensive mask she had worn during our jail visit. I'm sorry it came to this, she said flatly. That's all. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, just regret at being caught. I felt a final thread of hope snap within me. The sister I had grown up with, fought with, laughed with, was truly gone, or perhaps had never really existed as I thought I knew her. 2 uniformed officers stepped forward to escort Amber away. As she passed me in the aisle, she paused momentarily. I'll write to them, she said quietly. To Mom and Dad, not to you. I simply nodded, unsure what response she wanted or what I could possibly give. Then she was gone, led through a side door, to begin her sentence at the State Women's Correctional Facility 3 counties over. Outside the courthouse, I met with Sandra to discuss next steps. The asset liquidation order is significant, she explained as we walked to her car. The condo down payment can be recovered immediately, and the police have already inventoried items purchased with your parents' funds. It won't be the full amount, but it should be enough to provide some financial stability. What about the power of attorney situation? I asked. I'm still concerned about their vulnerability. Sandra nodded. I've prepared a new durable power of attorney document naming you as their agent, with additional safeguards in place. We'll also set up a trust with co-trustees, you and a professional fiduciary. That creates another layer of protection. And when I go back to Chicago? The professional fiduciary will handle day-to-day financial matters according to the trust's parameters, but you'll retain oversight authority. They'll provide monthly reports and consult you on any significant decisions. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it addressed the immediate concerns while allowing me to return to my life and career. The underlying worry, what would happen as my parents' needs increased, remained a shadow over future plans. As we reached her car, Sandra handed me a business card. This is Michelle Ochoa, a geriatric care manager I work with frequently. She can help coordinate your parents' medical care, social services, and daily needs. Think of her as your eyes and ears in Pinewood when you can't be here. I took the card gratefully, tucking it into my wallet. Thank you for everything, Sandra. I don't know how we would have navigated this without you. She smiled, the professional demeanor softening. That's why I do this work. Elder law isn't just about documents and court appearances. It's about helping families through some of life's most difficult transitions. That evening, I helped my parents finish packing for their move to Maple Ridge Senior Living Community, scheduled for the following day. The house had sold surprisingly quickly. A young family with 3 children had fallen in love with the spacious backyard and quiet neighborhood. They were paying fair market value, providing enough equity to secure my parents' new living arrangement and supplement their remaining savings. Mom sat on the floor of her bedroom, sorting through photographs that had been stored in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Despite the circumstances, she seemed almost peaceful, smiling occasionally at images from decades past. "Look at this one," she said, holding up a faded color photograph. "You and Amber on the first day of school. You were so protective of her." I sat beside her, taking the photo. There we were, me at 7, standing tall and proud in a blue plaid dress, and Amber at 4, clutching my hand, her eyes wide with apprehension about preschool. "You walked her to her classroom every day that year," Mom continued, "and waited for her after school, even though you had friends wanting you to play." The memory stirred something painful. "What happened to us, Mom? How did we go from that to this?" Mom sighed, carefully placing another photo in the keep pile. People grow in different directions, and sometimes the seeds of resentment are planted early, so subtle you don't notice until they've grown into something unmanageable. "Was I a bad sister?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had plagued me since Amber's arrest. "No," Mom said firmly, "but you were different people with different strengths. You were always focused, driven, responsible. Amber was creative, free-spirited, and impulsive. In some families, those differences complement each other. In others, they create friction," I finished. "And comparison," Mom added. "Which isn't fair to either child. Your father and I tried not to do that, but I'm sure we failed sometimes." We continued sorting in companionable silence, creating a much smaller collection of meaningful photographs to take to the new apartment. The process was as much about distilling memories as it was about physical downsizing. "Jessica," Mom said after a while, "I need you to promise me something." I looked up, surprised by the serious tone. "What is it?" "When Amber gets out, if she reaches out to you, don't close the door completely." My immediate instinct was to protest. After everything Amber had done, the idea of reconciliation seemed not just unlikely, but potentially harmful. "I'm not saying forgive and forget," Mom clarified, seeing my expression. "I'm saying leave room for the possibility of change, not for her sake, for yours." "I'll try," I said, not entirely convinced, but unwilling to add to my mother's burdens. "But it's hard to imagine trusting her again." "Trust is earned," Mom agreed. "But the capacity to offer someone a chance to earn it, that's a gift you give yourself as much as them. Holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it." Her wisdom hit home, though I knew the journey from intellectual understanding to emotional acceptance would be long and uncertain. The next morning, a small convoy of vehicles arrived to help with the move. Devin came with his truck to transport the furniture they were keeping. Ellie and her cousin brought a car loaded with cleaning supplies to prepare the house for its new owners. Several church members arrived with food and additional helping hands. The apartment at Maple Ridge was smaller but beautifully appointed, with wide doorways to accommodate Dad's occasional need for a walker, grab bars in the bathroom, and an emergency call system. The living room window overlooked a landscaped courtyard with raised garden beds where Mom could pursue her hobby despite her arthritis. Most importantly, the community offered tiered levels of care. Currently, my parents would live independently with minimal support, medication management, and weekly housekeeping. As their needs increased, additional services could be added without requiring another disruptive move. After the furniture was arranged and the essentials unpacked, everyone gathered in the community dining room for a meal. It felt like a strange hybrid of housewarming and farewell, tinged with both optimism and sadness. Devin took me aside during dessert. "You've done an amazing job handling all this, Jessica. Not many people could have managed a medical recovery, a family crisis, and a major transition like this simultaneously." "I didn't have much choice," I said, watching as Dad chatted animatedly with one of the other residents, the first time I'd seen him truly engaged in weeks. "There are always choices," Devin countered. "You chose to fight for your parents' security, despite your own health challenges. You chose to find a solution that preserved their dignity and independence. Don't diminish what you've accomplished." His words reminded me of something my neurologist had said during my follow-up appointment the previous week. Stress can exacerbate recovery, but purpose can accelerate it. Perhaps the very challenges that should have hindered my healing had, instead, provided the motivation to push through. The following day was my last in Pinewood before returning to Chicago. I had arranged a 3-day work week with my employer for the next 6 months, allowing me to spend long weekends in Pinewood. Twice monthly, it wasn't ideal, but it was workable. I met with Michelle Ochoa, the geriatric care manager Sandra had recommended, for coffee at a local cafe. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a practical demeanor and a tablet full of organizational apps and resources. "My role is to be your parents' advocate and your proxy when you can't be here," she explained, showing me the secure portal where she would document visits, concerns, and recommendations. "I'll coordinate with their medical providers, arrange transportation to appointments, and monitor for any changes in condition or needs." "And if there's an emergency?" I asked. "I'm on call 24/7 for my clients, and Maple Ridge has an excellent emergency response protocol. Between the two, your parents will have comprehensive coverage." She looked up from her tablet. "But the most important thing I do is build a relationship with them. I need to earn their trust so they'll tell me when something isn't right, physically, emotionally, or practically." I liked her approach. Rather than treating my parents as helpless objects to be managed, she recognized their agency and dignity, something Amber had failed to do. By the time I left Michelle, I felt more confident about returning to Chicago. The infrastructure of support we had assembled, Maple Ridge, Michelle, the trust, Devin's financial oversight, and the continued involvement of church friends, created a safety net that neither Amber nor any future predator could easily penetrate. My final stop was the Pinewood Cemetery, where generations of my family were buried. I hadn't planned this visit, but something drew me there on my way out of town, perhaps a need for connection with a past that seemed increasingly distant. I found my grandparents' graves easily, the headstones still relatively new. As I stood there, memories surfaced of summers spent at their farm, of Grandpa teaching both Amber and me to fish in the pond behind the barn, of Grandma showing us how to make her famous apple pie. In those memories, Amber and I were united, collaborators in childhood adventures rather than adversaries. When has that changed? Had there been a single pivotal moment, or was it a gradual drift apart, fueled by natural differences and subtle family dynamics? I placed a small stone on each grandparent's marker, a tradition my grandmother had taught us, a way of saying, "I was here, I remember you." As I turned to leave, an elderly groundskeeper nodded in greeting. "Family?" he asked, gesturing to the graves. "Yes," I replied. "My grandparents." He leaned on his rake. "Been coming here 53 years. I saw a lot of families. The happy ones, the broken ones, and everything in between." He looked at me with an unexpected perception. The thing about family is, it's like a mirror. It shows you things about yourself you might not see otherwise. I thanked him for the insight, unsure what to make of it, but feeling it held some truth I wasn't yet ready to fully examine. On the drive back to Chicago the next day, I reflected on everything that had transpired since my collapse just 3 months earlier. My life had been irrevocably changed, physically by the aneurysm, emotionally by Amber's betrayal, and practically by my parents' new circumstances. Yet amid these unwelcome changes, there were unexpected gifts. I had discovered resilience I didn't know I possessed. I had forged deeper connections with my parents, moving beyond the habitual roles we had played for decades. I had built a network of support that extended beyond family to include friends, professionals, and community members. Most significantly, I had gained a clearer perspective on what truly mattered. Before the aneurysm, I had been so focused on career advancement that I had neglected my health and limited my visits home. The crisis had realigned my priorities, forcing me to create a more balanced life. As I crossed the state line, my phone chimed with a text from Mom. Settled in nicely. Dad made friends with the retired chemistry professor down the hall. Already talking about starting a chess club. Drive safely. Love you. I smiled, feeling a weight lift. They would be okay. Different, but okay. Just as Mom had said that evening. On the porch swing, the Chicago skyline appeared on the horizon, familiar yet somehow changed. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed. I wasn't the same Jessica who had collapsed in that conference room. I was stronger in some ways, more vulnerable in others, and infinitely more aware of both the fragility and resilience of family bonds. The bank manager calling Amber ma'am, mistaking her for me, had been the first thread that unraveled her scheme. But it has also revealed a deeper truth. Sometimes it takes a case of mistaken identity to show us who we really are and what we're capable of becoming. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my Chicago apartment, watching the first snowfall. Of winter dust, the city in white. So much had changed since that fateful day when I collapsed in the conference room. My recovery had progressed well, though I still had regular checkups and took medication to manage my blood pressure. The company had promoted me to lead developer despite my modified work schedule, perhaps recognizing that my forced balance between professional and personal life had actually made me more effective. My phone rang with a familiar tone. Michelle Ochoa, my parents' care manager, for our weekly update call. Jessica, good morning, she greeted me. Just checking in with the usual updates. How are they doing? I asked, settling onto my couch. Your dad had a great week, Michelle reported. The chess club is thriving. They're up to 8 members now. And the cognitive exercises Dr. Morales recommended seem to be helping. His neurologist noted some stabilization in his last assessment. This was welcome news. Dad's Parkinson's hadn't magically improved, but the combination of appropriate medication, cognitive engagement, and physical therapy had slowed the progression more than we dared hope. And Mom? She's having more pain in her hands this week, Michelle said. The occupational therapist adjusted her splints and suggested some new adaptive tools for the kitchen. I've ordered them. They should arrive tomorrow. We discussed a few administrative matters, an upcoming specialist appointment, a small plumbing issue in their apartment that maintenance was addressing, and plans for their tax preparation in the coming months. Oh, and there's one more thing, Michelle added, her tone shifting slightly. Your mother mentioned that she received another letter from Amber yesterday. My stomach tightened automatically. Did she say what was in it? Not specifically, just that it seemed different from the previous ones. More reflective was the word she used. After Amber's sentencing, she had indeed written to our parents as promised. The early letters had been defensive and self-justifying, causing Mom to cry and Dad to grow confused about why his younger daughter wasn't visiting. I had suggested they stop reading them, but Mom insisted on maintaining the connection, however painful. Thanks for letting me know, I said. I'll call them this evening. After ending the call with Michelle, I opened my laptop to check my calendar. My next scheduled visit to Pinewood was the following weekend, but I wondered if I should go sooner. Mom had been stoic throughout the ordeal, but I knew Amber's communications affected her deeply. Before I could decide, an email notification appeared from Sandra Tompkins, the elder law attorney who had helped us navigate the aftermath of Amber's crimes. Jessica, I hope this finds you well. I'm writing regarding the restitution payments in your parents' case. The state has liquidated the remaining assets purchased with the misappropriated funds, and the proceeds, $27,840.32, have been deposited into the trust account as ordered by the court. Additionally, the parole board has requested information regarding your position on Amber's upcoming parole hearing, scheduled for January 15th. As the representative of the victims, your statement will be considered in their decision. Please let me know if you'd like to discuss this further. Warm regards. Sandra. I stared at the screen, momentarily disoriented. Amber's parole hearing. Of course it was approaching. She had been eligible for parole after 3 years, and we were nearing that milestone. The time had passed both slowly and quickly, marked by seasonal visits to Pinewood and the gradual establishment of new routines. The question of whether to oppose or support her parole was one I had avoided thinking about. Part of me still burned, with anger at what she had done, at the stress she had caused our aging parents during what should have been peaceful years. Another part remembered Mom's words about not closing the door completely. I drafted a brief reply to Sandra, thanking her for the information about the restitution and asking for more details about the parole statement process. Then I turned back to the window, watching the snow accumulate on the ledge as I considered what to do. That evening, I called my parents as promised. Dad answered, sounding stronger than he had in recent calls. Jessie girl, your timing is perfect. We just finished dinner. Cook made pot roast tonight. Not as good as your mother's, but not bad. I smiled at his lucidity. The cook was actually the dining room staff at Maple Ridge, but his awareness of what he had eaten and when was a positive sign. How's the chess club going, Dad? Michelle. Tells me you're expanding. 8 members now, he said proudly, including Dr. Wilson, retired chemistry professor from State University. Brilliant mind, terrible chess player. He chuckled. Makes me feel like a grandmaster. We chatted about his latest games and a documentary he had watched about deep-sea exploration before he passed the phone to Mom. Jessica, dear, how are you feeling? No headaches this week? Despite everything she had been through, Mom's first concerns were always for others. I'm fine, Mom. Michelle mentioned you got another letter from Amber? A pause. Yes, yesterday. It was different. Different how? I heard her settle into her favorite chair, the subtle creak of the cushion familiar even through the phone. She's been participating in a restorative justice program at the prison. Her latest letter actually contained an apology, a real one, not the defensive kind she usually writes. Do you believe it's genuine? I asked cautiously. I think she's beginning to understand the harm she caused, Mom said slowly. She wrote about working with a counselor who specializes in family dynamics, about recognizing patterns of resentment and entitlement that she hadn't been aware of. I remained skeptical, but tried to keep it from my voice. That sounds like a positive step. She also asked about you, Mom continued. How your recovery has progressed, whether you're still working for the same company. This surprised me. Amber had pointedly excluded me from her previous communications, directing her letters exclusively to our parents. What did you tell her? The truth. That you've been our rock through all of this. That your company values you enough to accommodate your regular visits home. Mom paused. And that you've never once spoken bitterly about her to us, despite having every reason to. That wasn't entirely accurate. I had certainly expressed anger in the early days. but I appreciated the sentiment behind Mom's words. "There's something else," Mom said, hesitating in her voice. "She asked if you would consider visiting her before her parole hearing." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, curiosity, apprehension. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Mom." "I understand, dear. And so would Amber, I think. She said in her letter that she would respect whatever decision you made." Mom sighed softly. "But she also said she has things she needs to say to you directly, things too important for a letter." We talked a while longer about practical matters, the upcoming holidays, their health, my plans for my next visit. But the question of Amber's request hovered in the background. After ending the call, I pulled out my laptop again and composed an email to Dr. Farhana Malik, a therapist I had been seeing occasionally since returning to Chicago. Her perspective had been invaluable during my recovery, helping me process not only the physical trauma of the aneurysm, but the emotional aftermath of Amber's betrayal. "Dr. Malik, I hope you're well. An unexpected situation has arisen that I could use your guidance on. My sister, the one who committed financial exploitation against our parents, has requested that I visit her in prison before her upcoming parole hearing. My instinct is to refuse, but I'm questioning whether that's the healthiest response for me or for my family. Do you have availability for a session this week?" Best, Jessica. Her response came within the hour, offering a slot the following afternoon. I accepted gratefully, then tried to distract myself with work for the remainder of the evening. But my mind kept circling back to Amber, to the possibility of facing her after all this time. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? What words could repair the damage she had done? And yet, wasn't I curious to know if the change Mom perceived was real? The next day's session with Dr. Malik was clarifying, as our conversations often were. She didn't tell me what decision to make, but helped me examine my motivations and fears from multiple angles. "It sounds like you're concerned that agreeing to visit might be interpreted as forgiveness or approval," she observed after I explained the situation. "Partly," I admitted. "I don't want to send a message to the parole board that what she did was okay." "But visiting and supporting parole are separate decisions," Dr. Malik pointed out. "You can hear what she has to say without endorsing her release." "I'm also afraid of being manipulated again," I confessed. "Amber has always been skilled at telling people what they want to hear." "That's a valid concern. What safeguards could you put in place to protect yourself emotionally?" We explored several options, having clear boundaries about the purpose and length of the visit, preparing specific questions in advance, debriefing with a trusted friend immediately afterward. Ultimately, Dr. Malik said as our session concluded, "This decision isn't about what you owe Amber. It's about what serves your own healing and that of your family system. Sometimes the path of greatest growth involves stepping toward what makes us uncomfortable, but only when we're sufficiently prepared and supported." I left her office with a clearer perspective, though still undecided. On the train ride home, I found myself remembering moments from our childhood. Amber teaching me to French braid my hair, me helping her with algebra homework, both of us sneaking out to the roof outside our bedroom window to watch meteor showers against our parents' explicit instructions. The sister in those memories seemed impossible to reconcile with the woman who had systematically exploited our parents' vulnerability and my medical crisis. Yet they were the same person, containing both the capacity for connection and for harm. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made my decision. I would visit Amber, not out of obligation or misplaced nostalgia, but because the alternative meant continuing to carry the weight of unresolved questions. Whether her apparent change was genuine or another manipulation, I needed to see for myself. The Women's Correctional Facility was a 2-hour drive from Chicago, a sprawling complex of beige buildings surrounded by multiple fences topped with razor wire. After passing through security, a process involving metal detectors, a thorough bag search, and multiple identity checks, I was led to a visiting room divided by a glass partition, much like the county jail where I had seen Amber after her arrest. I sat on the hard plastic chair, fighting the urge to check my watch or fidget with my visitor's badge. 10 minutes passed before a door on the other side opened and Amber appeared, escorted by a corrections officer. My first thought was how ordinary she looked in her prison uniform, neither the polished imposter who had emptied our parents' accounts, nor the defiant defendant from the courtroom. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She appeared thinner, with shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. She sat across from me, adjusting the telephone receiver with hands that seemed unfamiliar without their usual manicure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Thank you for coming," she finally said, her voice slightly hoarse. "I honestly didn't think you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. Amber nodded. "I wouldn't have blamed you." She looked down at her hands. "The therapist I've been working with suggested I try to put myself in your position, to imagine what it must have been like to wake up from a life-threatening condition, only to discover your sister had used the opportunity to steal from your parents and impersonate you." I said nothing, waiting. "The thing is," she continued, "I couldn't do it. Not really. I could intellectualize it, but I couldn't feel it. And that's part of what I've been working on here. My inability to truly empathize with others when my own needs or desires are involved." Her words sounded rehearsed, therapeutic. I remained skeptical. "Is this about your parole hearing?" A flicker of the old defensive Amber crossed her face, but she took a deep breath and let it pass. "Partly. I won't pretend it isn't. But it's also about after. About whether there can be any kind of relationship between us in the future. About whether I can have any place in the family again. That's not a decision I can make alone," I said, "or one that needs to be made today." "I know." She met my eyes directly. "But I needed to tell you something, and I couldn't do it through Mom and Dad." I nodded for her to continue. "I've spent a lot of time in therapy and in our restorative justice program, looking at why I did what I did. The easy explanation is that I was greedy and opportunistic. And yes, I wanted the money, the lifestyle, the escape from Pinewood." Her fingers tightened around the receiver. But underneath that was something else. Something I didn't want to admit even to myself. I waited, my own grip on the phone equally tense. "I wanted to be you," Amber said quietly. "Not just to have your things or your success, but to be the person that everyone respected, that everyone turned to. I wanted to matter the way you mattered." The raw honesty in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the script of someone merely playing the parole game. This was a deeper, more painful truth. When I was pretending to be you at the bank, with the power of attorney, making decisions for Mom and Dad, it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling important, authoritative. She shook her head slightly. "I know how twisted that sounds. But that's what I've been working through. Why I needed to steal someone else's identity instead of developing my own." I found myself remembering the groundskeeper's words at the cemetery about family being a mirror that shows you things about yourself you might not otherwise see. In Amber's distorted reflection of me, what was I seeing about myself? "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Amber continued. "I don't expect it, and I'm not sure I deserve it. But I am deeply, genuinely sorry, not just for getting caught, but for the pain I caused, for betraying the trust of the people who loved me most." We talked for another 40 minutes, covering territory both painful and necessary. Amber shared insights from her therapy about the roots of her behavior and childhood feelings of inadequacy. I spoke honestly about the impact of her actions on our parents and on my own recovery. Neither of us raised the subject of her potential release directly. That would be addressed through formal channels with Sandra's guidance. As our visiting time neared its end, Amber asked, "Will you tell Mom and Dad something for me?" That, Depends on what it is, I said, still cautious. Tell them I'm doing the work, real work, not just saying what I think people want to hear. She swallowed hard. And tell them that whatever happens with the parole board, I understand if they need to keep their distance. I won't pressure them either way. The corrections officer signaled that our time was up. As Amber stood to leave, she pressed her palm against the glass, a gesture from childhood, something we had done when one of us was sick and quarantined from the other. After a moment's hesitation, I raised my hand to mirror hers, the cold glass between us embodying all that separated us still. Trust broken, years lost, harm done. Yet in that simple gesture was also acknowledgement. I see you. You exist to me. I didn't know if there could ever be reconciliation between us, if the damage was too profound or the changes too uncertain. But as I drove back to Chicago that evening, I felt a subtle shift within myself. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first easing of a burden I had carried for too long. The snow had stopped, and stars pricked the clear winter sky as I approached the city skyline. I thought of my parents settling into their new life at Maple Ridge, of Dad's chess club and Mom's adapted gardening tools. I thought of the network of support we had built: Michelle, Sandra, Devin, my friends, the Pinewood community. A safety net stronger than the broken family ties it had replaced. And I thought of Amber, alone in her cell, facing her demons without the distractions of freedom. Was her remorse genuine? Would she reoffend if released? These weren't questions I could answer with certainty. But I realized that I no longer needed that certainty to move forward with my own life. The crisis that had begun with my collapse and Amber's betrayal had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability, about the complexities of family love, about the necessity of boundaries. It had also revealed strengths we hadn't known we possessed. As I pulled into my apartment building's garage, my phone chimed with a text from Mom. Hope your drive was safe. We love you. Call when you can. Such a simple message, yet loaded with meaning in the context of all we had survived together. I texted back, home safe, love you too, we'll call tomorrow. Then I added, after a moment's reflection, tell Dad to start practicing his chess moves. I'm bringing a new strategy next weekend. Life would continue, imperfect, challenging, but also rich with possibility. Whatever the parole board decided, whatever relationship might or might not be rebuilt with Amber, I knew with certainty that we would face it together, one day at a time. Different, but okay. 6 months after my prison visit with Amber, I stood in the arrivals area of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. My parents had finally agreed to visit Chicago, a milestone that represented not just physical travel, but an emotional journey as well. Dad's Parkinson's had stabilized enough that his neurologist approved the trip, and Mom's arthritis was better managed with new medications and therapies. Michelle had coordinated everything with meticulous attention to detail, wheelchair assistance. At both airports, direct flights to minimize fatigue, and a carefully planned itinerary that balanced activity with necessary rest periods. When they finally emerged through the security doors, I was struck by how much smaller they seemed than in my memory. Dad sat in an airport wheelchair, his trademark fedora slightly askew, while Mom walked beside him, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Yet despite their physical diminishment, there was something lighter about them, a certain peace that hadn't been present during the crisis with Amber. There she is, Dad announced, spotting me first. His voice was strong despite the slight tremor in his hands as he pointed. Our Chicago girl. I embraced them both, breathing in the familiar scent of Mom's lavender perfume and Dad's old-fashioned aftershave. Welcome to Chicago, I said, blinking back unexpected tears. I've been waiting so long for this. The flight wasn't bad at all, Mom reported as we headed toward baggage claim. Your father slept most of the way, and I finished that mystery novel Michelle lent me. The killer was the business partner, Dad interjected. I told your mother on page 50, but she wouldn't believe me. This flash of Dad's old sharpness made me smile. Though his cognitive abilities fluctuated, there were still moments when his intelligence shone through the fog of his condition. We collected their single shared suitcase. Mom had always been an efficient packer, and headed to my car. The drive to my apartment gave them their first glimpse of the city I had called home for nearly a decade, but that they had visited only twice before, both times brief weekend trips when they were still in better health. It's so vertical, Mom marveled, gazing up at the skyscrapers. How do you not feel overwhelmed by it all? You get used to it, I said. The same way you get used to knowing everyone's business in Pinewood. Dad chuckled. Fair point. My apartment had undergone significant modifications in preparation for their visit. I had temporarily replaced my sleek but low-slung sofa with a higher, firmer model that would be easier for them to get in and out of. The guest room now featured grab bars in strategic locations, a raised toilet seat, and a shower chair. None of the changes had been particularly expensive, but they represented a shift in my thinking, an acknowledgement that adapting my space for their needs wasn't just practical, but an act of love. This is lovely, Jessica, Mom said as I showed them around. And the view. You can see the lake. I had deliberately chosen this apartment partly for the view of Lake Michigan, which reminded me of fishing trips to Lake Waubesa with Dad during my childhood. It was a connection to the home I had needed when I first moved to the city. After they had settled in and rested, I ordered delivery from a restaurant specializing in comfortable, home-style food, nothing too exotic that might upset Dad's sensitive digestion or challenge their small-town palates. As we ate, the conversation flowed more easily than I had anticipated, touching on Maple Ridge gossip, Dad's chess club tournaments, and stories about my colleagues at work. It wasn't until after dinner, as we sat with cups of decaffeinated tea, another accommodation to their health needs, that Mom broached the subject I had been both expecting and dreading. We got a letter from the parole board, she said, setting down her cup carefully. About Amber. I took a deep breath. What did it say? They've approved her release, Dad said, surprising me with his directness. Scheduled for next month. Though I had known this was a possibility, even a probability, given Amber's participation in rehabilitation programs and her status as a first-time offender, hearing it confirmed sent a complex wave of emotions through me. How do you feel about that? I asked, watching their faces carefully. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, a silent communication honed by decades of marriage. Nervous, Mom admitted. But also hopeful? The counselor who runs the restorative justice program called us. She said Amber has done exceptional work, that her remorse appears genuine. And you believe that? I tried to keep any skepticism from my voice. I want to, Mom said simply. Is that foolish? No, I said after a moment's reflection. It's human, and it's who you've always been. Someone who looks for the good in others, who believes in the possibility of change. What about you? Dad asked, his gaze sharper than usual. The parole board mentioned your statement was measured but not opposed to her release. I had agonized over that statement, drafting and redrafting with Sandra's guidance. In the end, I had chosen not to actively oppose Amber's parole, focusing instead on the need for strict conditions, mandatory therapy, financial monitoring, no contact with our parents without their explicit consent, and regular check-ins with a parole officer. I think people can change, I said carefully. But I also think trust, once broken, needs to be earned back through consistent actions over time. If Amber is genuinely remorseful and has learned from this experience, then keeping her in prison longer doesn't serve anyone. But that doesn't mean we drop all boundaries or pretend nothing happened. Dad nodded, seeming satisfied with this response. Sandra helped us set up a separate small trust, he explained. If Amber needs financial assistance upon release, it will come from that designated fund with the trustees' approval, not directly from us. This was news to me, but I was impressed by their foresight. That's a good balance between compassion and protection. She'll be staying at a halfway house in Madison initially, Mom added. Part of her parole conditions include finding employment and attending regular therapy sessions. Has she asked to see you? I ventured. Not yet, Mom said. Her letters have been respectful of our boundaries. She understands we need time. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Plans for their week in Chicago, a performance of the symphony I had tickets for, a special exhibition at the Art Institute that Mom had expressed interest in. But the news about Amber's impending release hovered in the background, a complex reality we were all adjusting to in our different ways. Later that night, after my parents had retired to the guest room, I sat by the window looking out at the city lights, processing my feelings. Was I ready to have Amber back in the world, potentially back in our lives in some capacity? The sister who had visited their financial security, manipulated their trust, and impersonated me? The question had no simple answer. My visit to the prison had convinced me that Amber's remorse wasn't entirely performative. There had been authentic pain and self-awareness in her words, but genuine remorse didn't automatically rebuild trust or repair damage. My phone buzzed with a text from Devin. Hope your parents arrived safely. Anything you need while they're visiting? Devin had remained a steadfast friend through everything, gradually becoming something more over the past year. We had been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly given all the upheaval in my life. He understood the complexity of my family situation and had never pushed for more than I was ready to give. I texted back, "They're settled in. Dad already?" Critiqued my chess strategy and Mom's reorganizing my kitchen cabinets. All normal. Just found out Amber's getting parole next month. His response came quickly. How are you feeling about that? Such a simple question, yet so difficult to answer. I typed, deleted, and retyped several responses before settling on honesty. Confused. Part of me is still angry. Another part is curious to see if the changes are real. Mostly I'm worried about protecting my parents while respecting their desire to potentially reconcile eventually. That all makes sense, he replied. Want to talk about it tomorrow? I can bring lunch to your office. I accepted gratefully, then set my phone aside and returned to the window. Below, the city continued its nighttime pulse, taxis and buses flowing through streets, windows lit in neighboring buildings, the distant wail of a siren. Life continues, evolving, adapting to changing circumstances, just as we were all trying to do. The week with my parents in Chicago proved to be a healing experience for all of us. I had taken time off work to be their guide, and we settled into a gentle rhythm of morning outings followed by afternoon rest periods. Dad particularly enjoyed our visit to the Adler Planetarium, where his lifelong interest in astronomy found new expression. Mom fell in love with the Garfield Park Conservatory, its humid warmth soothing her arthritic joints as she marveled at the tropical plants. On their final evening in Chicago, I had arranged a special dinner at home with Devin joining us. He had met my parents briefly during visits to Pinewood, but this was their first opportunity for extended conversation. I watched with quiet joy as he drew Dad into a discussion about the historical chess masters, demonstrating a genuine interest in the older man's passion rather than mere politeness. Later, as Devin helped me clear the dishes while my parents rested in the living room, he spoke quietly. Your dad's mental acuity is impressive, especially considering his diagnosis. It comes and goes, I explained. Today's a good day. We'll probably pay for it tomorrow with increased fatigue and confusion, but it's worth it to see him engaged like this. And your mom? How do you think she's really doing? I glanced toward the living room, where Mom was showing Dad something on her tablet, probably photos from their friend at Maple Ridge who was watching their apartment. Better than I expected, I admitted. The new treatments are helping her, physically, and I think the move to Maple Ridge has actually reduced her stress levels. There's less to manage, more social interaction, and proper support when they need it. Devin nodded. They seem more at peace than when I first met them after everything. They are, I agreed. We all are, in different ways. Even with Amber's parole coming up, there's a sense that we've found our footing again. After Devin left, I joined my parents in the living room. Dad had dozed off in the recliner I had rented specifically for his visit, while Mom scrolled through photos on her tablet. He looks so happy, she said, showing me a picture from our visit to the lakefront. Dad stood with his arm around me, the Chicago skyline behind us, both of us squinting into the sun. It's been a good week, I agreed, settling beside her on the sofa. Better than good, Mom corrected. Necessary. For all of us. She set the tablet aside. Devin is a wonderful man, I smiled. He is. And he's good for you. She patted my hand. I'm worried about you, you know. Even before the aneurysm. Always working so hard, building your career, but not making much space for the rest of life. I've changed, I acknowledged. The health scare forced me to, but I think it needed to happen. I was burning myself out before. Sometimes the worst circumstances bring the most important lessons, Mom mused. Not that I would have chosen any of this, your illness, Amber's actions, but I can see how you've grown through it all. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Dad sleep peacefully. I need to ask you something, I finally said. About Amber. Mom turned to me attentively. When she's released, if she reaches out to you and Dad directly, will you tell me? Not because I want to control your relationship with her, but because I want to make sure you're protected. Mom's eyes filled with understanding. Of course we will. But Jessica, you need to know something too. She took my hand. Your father and I have discussed this extensively. Any reconciliation with Amber will be gradual, supervised, and with full transparency. We won't be keeping secrets or allowing ourselves to be manipulated again. I believe you, I said, squeezing her hand. I just worry. That's what loving people does, Mom said with a small smile. It makes us vulnerable to worry, but it also gives us resilience we didn't know we had. 3 weeks after my parents returned to Pinewood, I received an unexpected email from a name I didn't immediately recognize. Taylor Ramirez. The subject line read simply, Regarding Amber Reynolds. I opened it cautiously. Ms. Reynolds, my name is Taylor Ramirez, and I serve as the Reentry Coordinator at the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. I'm contacting you regarding your sister, Amber Reynolds, who will be released on parole next week. As part of our transitional planning, we encourage the restoration of healthy family connections when appropriate and desired by all parties. Amber has expressed interest in eventually rebuilding a relationship with you, but is committed to respecting your boundaries and timeline. If you are open to it, I would like to schedule a call to discuss possible paths forward, including mediated communication or meetings in the future. If you prefer no contact at this time, we will certainly honor that decision as well. Please let me know your thoughts at your convenience. Sincerely, Taylor Ramirez, MSW, CSAC Reentry Coordinator, Wisconsin Department of Corrections. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Dr. Malik with a brief note asking for her perspective before our next session. Then I closed my laptop and took a walk along the lakefront, giving myself space to process this new development. The fact that Amber was working through official channels rather than attempting to contact me directly seemed promising, a sign of respect for boundaries that had been notably absent in her previous behavior. Yet I remained cautious, aware of her capacity for manipulation and her skill at presenting herself in the best possible light to authority figures. By the time I returned to my apartment, I had reached a tentative decision. I would speak with the reentry coordinator, not to commit to any particular path, but to gather information and establish my own boundaries clearly. Whatever came next would need to unfold slowly, with careful consideration for my parents' well-being and my own emotional health. I drafted a response to Taylor Ramirez, agreeing to a phone consultation the following week. As I hit send, I felt a curious mixture of apprehension and something that resembled hope. Not for an instant restoration of sisterly bonds, but for the possibility that all of us, including Amber, might continue to heal and grow in our separate ways. That evening, I called my parents as usual to check in. After updates about Dad's latest chess tournament victory and Mom's new watercolor class, I mentioned the email from the reentry coordinator and my decision to take the call. We got a similar email, Mom revealed. We're going to talk with Ms. Ramirez next Monday. Are you nervous about it? I asked. A little, Mom admitted, but also curious. The person Amber has become through this experience. I want to know her, even if slowly and carefully. Just promise me one thing, I said. No matter what happens with Amber, we keep talking, openly with each other. No secrets, no separate agendas. Absolutely, Dad chimed in, his voice stronger than usual. We're a team now, Jessie girl, more than we ever were before. After we hung up, I found myself staring at the framed photo on my bookshelf, the one Mom had pointed out during their visit, of Dad and me by the lakefront. I now noticed something in our expressions that had escaped me before. A resilience that hadn't been there a year earlier. A hard-won wisdom reflected in our eyes. Whatever came next with Amber, reconciliation, limited contact, or continued separation, we would face it together, from a foundation stronger than the one that had been tested by her betrayal. Not because we had forgotten or minimized the harm done, but because we had survived it and learned from it. The bank manager calling Amber ma'am had been the first thread that unraveled her scheme. But it had also been the first step in a journey none of us could have anticipated, a journey that had led us not back to where we started, but forward to a new understanding of ourselves and each other. Different, but okay. And maybe, eventually, better than okay. 2 years to the day after my collapse in that Chicago conference room, I stood outside Riverside Coffee in Madison, Wisconsin, neutral territory for one of the most significant meetings of my life. The autumn air carried a crispness that reminded me of childhood walks to school with Amber in tow, her small hand clutching mine as fallen leaves crunched beneath our feet. Those memories felt like they belonged to different people now, characters in a story I had read rather than lived. I had arrived 20 minutes early, deliberately choosing a table with clear sightlines to both the entrance and exit. Devin had offered to accompany me, but this was something I needed to do alone. He understood, as he always did, kissing me goodbye at the train station with a simple, "Call me when you're ready." Our relationship had deepened over the past year, moving from friendship to romance to partnership with a natural progression that sometimes surprised me after years of high-pressure dating in Chicago's professional scene. Last month, he moved into my apartment, bringing his chess collection, extensive cookbook library, and a steady presence that made even difficult days more manageable. The bell above the cafe door chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. Amber entered, pausing just inside the doorway as her eyes adjusted from the bright sunshine outside. She scanned the room until her gaze found mine, and for a moment we simply looked at each other across the distance. She looked different. Her hair cut into a practical bob, her clothing simple but neat, her posture less performatively confident and more genuinely grounded. Gone was the flashy jewelry and designer clothing that had once been signals of her covetousness. Instead, she wore a navy blue blazer over a simple white shirt, professional but understated. This was our third meeting since her release from prison 18 months ago. The first had been in the structured environment of her halfway house, with Taylor Ramirez facilitating a carefully planned conversation that felt more like a supervised visitation than a family reunion. The second had been a brief, tense lunch, 6 months later, where we had struggled to find neutral topics amid the weight of our shared history. Today marked a new phase, a meeting without mediators, requested by Amber to discuss something she described as important. She approached my table with measured steps, neither rushing toward reconciliation nor dragging with reluctance. "Jessica," she said simply, "thank you for coming." "You said it was important," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. After ordering drinks, herbal tea for both of us, a small shared preference I had forgotten until that moment, we sat in a silence that was uncomfortable yet not hostile. "How are Mom and Dad?" she asked finally, wrapping her hands around her mug as if drawing warmth from it. "Stable," I said. "Dad has good days and bad days. The new medication is helping with the tremors, though the cognitive symptoms are more variable. Last week he remembered the names of all his chess club members. The week before he thought I was a home health aide." I paused, softening slightly. "Mom's garden at Maple Ridge won first prize in their community competition. The physical therapist says working with the specially designed tools has actually improved her hand strength." Amber smiled genuinely. "She always did have the greenest thumb in Pinewood. Remember that year she grew tomatoes the size of softballs?" "Dad took one to school for his science class," I recalled, surprised by the spontaneous shared memory. "Called it Botanical Anomaly Day." The supervised phone calls she had with our parents over the past year had been carefully limited to general updates, avoiding deeper emotions or past conflicts, until all parties felt ready. This incremental approach had been recommended by both Taylor and Dr. Malik, allowing trust to rebuild slowly if possible. "How's the new position at work?" Amber asked. During our previous meeting, I had mentioned being considered for a promotion to technical director. "Challenging but good," I answered. "I'm managing a team now, which means more meetings and fewer coding sessions. It's an adjustment." The small talk felt both necessary and insufficient, a bridge too fragile for the weight of our history, but the only starting point available to us. "You said you had something specific to discuss," I prompted, not unkindly, but with practical directness. Amber nodded, reaching into her bag to withdraw a manila envelope. "I've been working as an administrative assistant at Carson Accounting for the past year," she began. "Living frugally, sharing an apartment with another woman from the halfway house. No luxuries, no unnecessary expenses. I knew this already, from my parents and from the quarterly updates Taylor had provided during Amber's first year of parole. I've been saving everything I can," she continued, sliding the envelope across the table. "It's not the full amount yet, but it's a start." I opened the envelope to find a cashier's check made out to our parents for $25,000. "This is substantial," I said, genuinely surprised. Based on her salary at the accounting firm, this represented significant sacrifice. "It's about a quarter of what I stole," Amber acknowledged. "I know money can't fix what I broke, but the restitution matters to me. Not just because it's required by my parole, but because it's tangible proof that I'm trying to make amends." I studied her face, looking for signs of the old manipulation, the calculated charm she had once wielded so effectively. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar, a steady calm, an acceptance of responsibility without the defensive edge that had characterized her previous apologies. "The parole board only required minimum monthly payments," I noted, folding the check carefully back into its envelope. "This isn't about meeting minimum requirements," Amber said quietly. "It's about doing what's right, however long it takes." She reached back into her bag and produced a small leather-bound notebook. "I've been keeping track of everything, not just the financial restitution, but the internal work. My therapist suggested it as a way to maintain accountability to myself." She opened the journal, revealing neat columns of dates, amounts, and brief notes. Each entry represents a payment or a significant step in therapy. The goal isn't just to repay the money, but to understand why I did what I did and ensure it never happens again. The meticulous record-keeping was so unlike the impulsive, entitled Amber, I had known that I found myself momentarily speechless. When I was in prison, she continued, filling the silence, I met women who had committed similar crimes: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. Many of them had rationalized their actions through elaborate justifications, just as I had. She closed the journal, her fingers lingering on its cover. Working with them in the restorative justice program forced me to confront the reality of what I'd done, not as an abstract financial crime, but as a profound betrayal of the people who should have been able to trust me most. What changed? I asked the question that had haunted me since her apparent transformation began. Is it just that you got caught? That you faced consequences? Amber didn't flinch from the directness of my query. Being caught was the catalyst, not the cause, she said thoughtfully. The real change happens gradually, through countless small moments of accountability. Having to look at myself without excuses or deflections, working with a therapist who wouldn't let me hide behind justifications. She met my gaze directly. And honestly, seeing the consequences of my actions not just for me, but for all of us. Watching from a distance as you struggled to put everything back together while dealing with your own health crisis. Knowing what it did to Mom and Dad, not just financially but emotionally. We ordered lunch and continued talking, the conversation flowing more naturally as the initial tension eased. Amber shared details about her job, her ongoing therapy, and the volunteer work she had begun with a financial literacy program for incarcerated women. I told her about my promotion at work, my deepening relationship with Devin, and the weekend visits to Pinewood that had become a cherished routine. I've been teaching a budgeting class at the women's shelter near my apartment, Amber explained, using my accounting skills for something positive. It's ironic. I spent years mismanaging my own finances and exploiting others, and now I'm helping women create financial stability for themselves and their children. That sounds meaningful, I acknowledged. How did you get involved with that? Through my halfway house, actually. One of the requirements was community service, and they connected me with the shelter. After my required hours were completed, I asked to stay on as a regular volunteer. As she described the women she worked with, many escaping abusive relationships with no financial resources or literacy, I glimpsed a compassion in Amber that had been largely absent in our childhood and early adulthood. Whether this was genuine, growth, or strategic image management remained an open question, but I found myself wanting to believe in the possibility of authentic change. How are things with your friend from the halfway house? I asked. Your roommate? Tanya? She's doing well, got promoted at her job at the medical office. We're thinking of renewing our lease for another year. Amber hesitated, then added, It's strange, having a friendship based on complete honesty. Everyone in the halfway house knew exactly why everyone else was there. No pretenses, no hiding the worst things we'd done. That must have been difficult, I observed. Terrifying at first, Amber admitted, but eventually liberating. When people know the worst about you and choose to connect anyway, it creates a different kind of relationship. The conversation wasn't easy. Moments of connection alternated with painful silences and careful navigation around still tender wounds. But there was something different in our dynamic, a tentative authenticity that had been absent in our previous interactions. As we finished our meals, Amber hesitated, fidgeting with her napkin. There's something else I wanted to ask you about. I waited, guard slightly raised. Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary is coming up in 4 months, she said. I know you're planning something at Maple Ridge. This was true, a modest celebration with their friends from the community and a few longtime Pinewood neighbors who still kept in touch. Devin and I had been coordinating with Michelle to ensure the event would accommodate Dad's increasingly variable cognition and Mom's physical limitations. I'd like to be there, Amber said, then quickly added, but only if everyone is comfortable with it. I don't want to disrupt their day or make it about our family drama. In the old days, Amber would have simply shown up or created a scene about being excluded. This request, with its acknowledgement of potential discomfort and prioritization of our parents' experience, reflected a significant shift. I'll talk to them, I promised, and to Devin and Michelle, since they're helping with the arrangements. It would need to be carefully planned. I understand, Amber said, neither pushing nor withdrawing. Whatever they decide, I've written them an anniversary letter and put together a photo album. Maybe you could give it to them if being there in person isn't right yet. After paying for our meals, splitting the check equally, another small but notable change from the past when Amber would conveniently forget her wallet, we walked outside into the afternoon sunshine. I have something else for you, Amber said, reaching into her bag one more time. She handed me a small flat package, wrapped in simple blue paper. Don't open it now, just when you're ready. We parted with an awkward, brief hug, our first physical contact since her arrest. As I watched her walk toward the bus stop, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: cautious hope, lingering wariness, and a peculiar sense of grief for the uncomplicated, sisterly relationship we might have had in another life. The train ride back to Chicago gave me time to reflect. The person I had met today wasn't the old Amber, capable of elaborate deception and callous exploitation. But neither was she a completely transformed individual, free from the patterns and tendencies that had led to her crimes. She was somewhere, in between. A work in progress, as we all were in different ways. It wasn't until I was back in my apartment, Devin busy preparing dinner in the kitchen, that I unwrapped Amber's gift. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Mom and Dad on their wedding day, young and radiant, flanked by their parents. A family before Amber and I existed, captured in a moment of pure optimism about the future. Tucked into the frame was a note in Amber's neat handwriting. I found this while sorting through old family photos for the anniversary album. Thought, you should have the original. Whatever happens between us, we share these roots. When I called my parents that evening to tell them about the meeting and the restitution check, their response was measured. That's significant progress, Mom said. Both the money and the way she approached it. Do you think she's genuinely changed? I asked the question that had been circling in my mind all day. Dad, having one of his lucid evenings, joined the conversation. People don't change completely, Jessie girl. But they can grow, develop new patterns to replace harmful ones. The question isn't whether she's an entirely different person, but whether she's doing the difficult work of becoming a better version of herself. His wisdom, emerging through the fog of his condition, struck me deeply. About the anniversary celebration, I began cautiously. We've been discussing that, Mom interjected. We'd like her to come, but perhaps for just part of the event. Michelle suggested having the main celebration, then a smaller family gathering afterward. Are you sure? I asked. It's your day. There shouldn't be any pressure or stress. At our age, Dad said with unexpected clarity, you start to see time differently. We don't know how many more anniversaries we'll have together with our faculties intact. If there's a chance to have both our daughters present, even with all the complicated history, we want to take it. After hanging up, I shared the details of the meeting with Devin as we sat at our dining table, the remains of his excellent lasagna between us. It sounds promising, he said carefully. But it's okay to remain cautious. Trust takes time to rebuild. That's the thing, I said, turning the wedding photo in my hands. Part of me wants to believe she's changed, that we could have some kind of relationship again. Another part remembers exactly what she did and wonders if I'm being naive. Devin covered my hand with his. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can acknowledge positive steps without dropping all boundaries. Rebuilding trust is a gradual process. not a single decision. That night, as we stood at our apartment window looking out at the Chicago skyline, Devon's arm around my waist, I reflected on the long, unexpected journey that had begun with my collapse and Amber's betrayal. In the worst moment of the crisis, when I discovered what she had done, I could never have imagined standing with her in a coffee shop 2 years later, discussing our parents' anniversary celebration. Life rarely follows the narratives we expect. Sometimes it breaks apart in ways that seem irreparable, only to reform in new patterns we couldn't have envisioned. The bank manager calling Amber ma'am, mistaking her for me, had triggered a cascade of events that transformed all of our lives. I still didn't know what the future held for our fractured family. Amber's continued recovery wasn't guaranteed. My parents' health would eventually decline further. My own life would continue to evolve with its unique challenges and joys. But standing there, I felt a quiet certainty about one thing. Whatever came next, we would face it with the wisdom and resilience forged through our darkest times. Not as the family we once were, but as the people we had become, shaped by crisis, strengthened by recovery, and committed to the patient work of rebuilding what truly mattered, one careful step at a time. 4 months later, on a gentle spring afternoon, I stood in the common room at Maple Ridge, watching as my parents cut their anniversary cake. 50 years of marriage, with all its joys and challenges, celebrated amid friends who had become like family. Dad was having one of his better days, dressed in his good suit with the bow tie he insisted on wearing for special occasions. Mom's eyes sparkled as she looked around the room at the gathering of people who had supported them through the most difficult period of their lives. In the corner, speaking quietly with Michelle, stood Amber. She had arrived exactly as planned, joining the celebration after the main event had concluded, slipping in without fanfare or disruption. She wore a simple dress in Mom's favorite color, carrying a small gift wrapped with obvious care. When she approached our parents, there was an initial moment of awkwardness, too much history for anything else. But then Dad, with the directness that occasionally broke through his confusion, simply opened his arms. The hug that followed wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation moment, but a tentative beginning. A recognition that healing, like harm, happens not in dramatic gestures, but in countless small moments of choice. Later, as Devon and I gathered discarded wrapping paper and empty plates, I caught sight of the three of them together, Mom, Dad, and Amber, looking through the photo album she had created. There was sadness in the tableau, a recognition of years lost and trust damaged, but also something else. The quiet courage of people choosing to move forward, despite imperfect circumstances and uncertain outcomes. "You okay?" Devon asked softly, noticing my distraction. "Yes," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "Not perfect, not fixed, but okay." And in that moment, it was enough. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real one, with all its complexities and contradictions. The story that had begun with betrayal and crisis was continuing, evolving into something we were all still writing together, one day, one choice, one small act of courage at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you, right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.